Any health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
Welcome to Accelerated Health TV and Radio Show. I'm your host, Sara Banta. I'm a health coach, natural supplement expert, and a busy mom of three. Make sure you hit the subscribe button below as you're notified every week with my new podcast on Mondays and Tuesdays. And if you haven't already, join my free group coaching on Telegram with the link below. I teach you on a daily basis with tips and tools to enhance your health. It's free. There's no downside. You will be a part of a like-minded group to support you on your journey, in addition to truly taking control of your health. I am so excited about our guest today because a lot of you are going through those hormonal changes, and we're going to dive into parts and things that most people aren't talking about. Betty Murray is a nutrition expert, researcher, certified functional medicine practitioner, and speaker, and she helps women over 40 harness their hormones to lose weight, optimize sleep, restore energy, and thrive. During her research, Betty had made 4 key discoveries that lead to hormone and metabolic imbalances that no one's talking about, that plague women over 40. Restoring that balance is the key. Metabolic and hormone pathways is the basis of her Hormone Reset Program. She's also the host of the Menopause Mastery Podcast, which I highly recommend, and the founder and CEO of Living Well Dallas Functional Medicine Center. Welcome, Betty. How are you?
Thank you for having me. I'm great.
I am so excited because you talk about things that no one talks about. And I talk a lot about menopause. I talk a lot about detox and the importance of detox as we're getting into, our 40s and our 50s. I'm 47. The things that were working for me in my 20s and 30s don't work anymore. And even though we're just talking about women here, I'm seeing it in my husband. I'm seeing it in all the men in our lives, right? So why don't we start with talking about your experience working with hormones and what got you started down this path?
It's interesting because it's a circuitous path. I think like many of us that end up in this world, this isn't necessarily where we started. For me, a lot of my health issues started as a kid. I would have these periods of digestive upset that would kind of come and go. I'm a little bit older than you, so I'm a kid of the 70s and 80s. And, it was basically if you didn't fall over dead, they kind of brushed you off and was like, okay, go about your day. And it wasn't until I really got into college and then afterwards as a young adult and entered my career that my digestive problems kept getting worse and worse, and the episodes got worse and worse. And over time, I had actually entered into the arena of IT. Oddly enough, I'm very strong at like technical kind of information, scientific information. But I was working a job where I was working 80 to 100 hours a week. My digestive stuff really started ramping up, and I ended up being diagnosed with colitis at that point. And, I asked what I thought would be a completely legitimate question, which was, could I change something in my diet that would change the trajectory of my autoimmune digestive disorder? And this very overweight gastroenterologist sparked this gigantic laugh in my face and said, it has nothing to do with what you eat. And I sat there for a second. I was like, oh, wait a minute. A 5-year-old could tell you that something about what you're eating is probably going to play a role in an autoimmune digestive disorder. And so, I was already kind of on this trajectory at that point, like doing yoga. And so I was doing other things, but that really got me on this point where I was like, I need to go back and figure out how to fix myself. And I think it's in nutrition. And I started going down that path, and I was able to get my digestive stuff under control. But by the time I hit my 40s, it was like wheels came off the bus. Yeah. I had been into bodybuilding. I was into nutrition long before I even started taking classes. But all of a sudden I started breaking out with acne. My periods start getting weird. And, everybody's like, oh, menopause is in your 50s. That's not it. And, I went down this kind of crazy rabbit hole working with a lot of different functional medicine practitioners, honestly, getting different hormones, getting this, getting that, and I'm gaining weight and my hair's falling out and I can't sleep. And, my 40s just weren't fun. And for me, it was like, okay, I fixed so much of what was going on digestively, my autoimmune condition, but the hormones were sort of this black box. And all of what was being said and used in the functional medicine community, I was doing all the right things. I've spent 2 decades at this point studying. So I really went back for my Ph.D. and I wanted to dig into the research and look for the things that weren't being talked about. And so for me, it took me all the way into my late 40s, moving into my 50s, going through that research and sort of pulling it apart. And I was able to lose literally 30 pounds that I could not lose to save my life doing high intensity interval, low carb, high protein, you name it. All the stuff that worked for me in my 30s all of a sudden didn't until I figured out kind of these things we're going to talk about today. And, I was like, I know this is what's happening to me. And I know this is a percentage of women that come to me that are like, I'm doing all the right stuff and it's not working.
I feel like you and I had the same path because I remember going to the GI doctor. Number one, I would go week after week and they would keep asking me my name. I'm like, do you remember me coming in last week? The treatment was horrible because I had Crohn's disease and they said nothing. They wanted me to take Metamucil. And that was their answer to all of my symptoms. And I was smart enough to know, no. There's something more to that. And they didn't tell me to change my diet. They didn't tell me any of that. So that was when I was in my 20s and I had PCOS. No one ever told me to look at my insulin resistance or my thyroid. All of these things that are fixable and doable. No one was giving me answers. And you know what? I'm actually glad they didn't because it forced me to go down this journey and dig and to learn more and more. And then, of course, do what I'm doing and helping so many people like you are. And then meeting people like you who then takes the level to another, a whole nother level up. So we are talking about, okay, high protein, low carb, working out, getting sleep, all doing the right things. But there's this change of hormones that happens in our body. What are the symptoms of hormonal balance that women should be looking for?
So, in the West, let's say, okay, United States, we discuss menopause as if it is this single point in time. So the technical term for it is it's 1 year past the last time you had your period. That's this like, here's your cake, here's your candles, you hit menopause. Okay. But really what we're talking about is this average of 8 years. So that's the average. That means some women spend 2 decades and some women may skirt it and not really have a lot of issues, where we have significant changes to our sex hormones. Where our fertility changes. That's why it's harder to have a child, especially the first time in your 40s. And that culminates in the end of your cycling between your major hormones, your 3 estrogens and your progesterone, which kind of marks the end of fertility. But the problem is all of your hormones, whether it's thyroid, insulin, ghrelin, glucagon, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, all play together. They are a symphony, and anytime one of them is out of balance, all of the other ones are going to shift to try and bring harmony. And so a lot of people get focused on this one hormonal thing they think is going on, and they don't realize that the entire band has shifted from playing a waltz to scat jazz, and that there's a whole different song going on, and that you can't just take a thyroid medication or take, some birth control to cover up, heaven forbid, your sex hormone problems, and all of a sudden everything's going to be magical. That there's usually a lot more going on. So when somebody's looking at the symptoms, it can be everything from weight gain to acne to changes in your skin texture and hair. Definitely period changes like heavy periods or periods get abnormal or go away. all the way to fibroids and endometriosis and fibrocystic breast disease, sleep issues like insomnia, mood issues, memory issues. So psychosomatic things like, anxiety, depression, they all center on those hormones and the shift that we're having because we're female.
And then the doctor puts you on an antidepressant and doesn't address the real issue in this whole cascade. And that's where I want to get into mitochondrial health, because I always say, it's not the fat is not going to be the paleo, the keto, the carnivore diet. It's going to be the mitochondrial diet. And that's what I want to focus on, is where is that shift happening, and the estrogen cascade of the domino effect of what occurs.
Yeah. So, estrogen. So let me actually back up. So what we know is after 20 years old, the average woman is going to lose about 5% of their metabolic, basically engine, right? So the speed of their engine every decade after 20, right? So we have this natural slowing of our metabolic engine. You say, well, why is that happening? That doesn't seem to happen to men. And part of it is because estrogen in particular, so we have our 3 estrogens, estradiol, estriol, and estrone. Estradiol is the one that circulates, that's made by your ovaries. That's the protective one. Your fat cells make estrone. And through the detox pathways, we make estriol. So as we go through perimenopause into our 40s, that shift starts to happen where the body fat makes more estrone. It's more pro-inflammatory. It doesn't have the same protective effects. So what's interesting is it's all about having enough, not too much. It's kind of like the 3 little bears. So it's not, you don't want estrogen, because estrogen in a young woman, a 20 or 30-year-old, actually helps us stay lean, right? Helps us have our feminizing features, but it also helps us stay lean. But when we hit our 40s, we get too much estrogen because the other major hormone, progesterone, starts to decline. So that one's on the decline already. And so we end up with usually a little bit of estrogen dominance, and it's a less clean estrogen. Well, all of our mitochondria have receptors for estrogen. Because I kept looking at it and I kept thinking, well, a woman and a man can go on a diet, any diet really. And the guy goes, man, I gave up pizza and beer, and they drop like 10 pounds in a week. And the woman's like, okay, I had lettuce and a cold piece of dried chicken breast, and I'm starving to death, and nothing happened. Right? So there's a whole bunch of metabolic effects of being female that is different than a man. And part of it is because as a woman, here's the reality of it. If I can be a little bit crass, I don't think your listeners would hate this, but the reality is we need a bunch of women on the planet and a few men, and we will reproduce and have more people, right? So women are designed to conserve. Everything about our body is designed to try and hold on to body fat for fear of famine. And it's through those sex hormones and the signaling all the way down to our powerhouse, our mitochondria, that it happens. And so that's the first thing. It's like, and all the studies have been done on men up until very recently. And then some of those are really piss poor studies and they're terribly done. But everybody just assumes that we're hairy men, right? And so we're applying science that hasn't ever been done on women. And so nobody's really looking at our very basic mitochondrial function. There's changes because we have circulating changes of hormones. So
are you saying that men do not have a decrease in their mitochondrial health like the women do?
Correct.
And
correct. We have.
And how are we going to then change that pattern of the estrogens going into perimenopause and menopause?
So a couple of the things that we have to look at. So our longevity. So if we looked at 1900, the average lifespan was 57 years old for a female. So I'm 53. So that means literally 4 years from now, I'm probably in the ground because that was just our lifespan. And we made huge advances in the last 200 years with sanitation and those kind of things that allowed us to like take our longevity and skyrocket. So now the average lifespan is almost 90 years old for a female. And then children that are born today, we're looking at 100, right? So part of it is, I think if we flash forward 100,000 years, we're going to see that menopause is going to be something we do much later in life, right? So if we look at that, we say, okay, men don't have those changes. Their metabolism slows slightly, but not to the same degree. And even their testosterone slows more gradually, right? So a man's is going to be half of what it was at 20, at 40. But then the decline is less slow and less impactful. So they have more robust mitochondria, particularly more muscle tissue because of that, which means they're just in general more metabolically active. So as women, part of what we'll probably see is that we'll stay fertile for longer. The other thing that I think plays a role, and I think it's very Western, because if you look at other societies that aren't as westernized as the United States, Canada, and Western Europe, is they don't have the same crappy menopause symptoms that we do. If you go to sub-Saharan Africa and you start talking to women that have gone through menopause, they don't have the same complaints.
Well, dirty liver, processed foods, radiation. I mean, it's the environmental diet. I talk about this all the time, and the liver getting backed up. I mean, they are eating fruit during the summer, not year round, like you've talked about. And I want to get into that. And the uric acid, people think of uric acid and gout, but I love what you dive into with the uric acid. This blew my mind.
Yeah. So people that live in less westernized worlds have a cleaner diet, a better microbiome. They may not have the same composition of foods, like there's more food scarcity, but overall they don't have the toxin burden, generally speaking, that we do. And they also have a society that cultivates community and cultivates relaxation. Like the other part of it is our stress chemistry, which I think is a huge player as to why we see such hormonal imbalances, particularly in women. So let's get into that mitochondrial piece, because this is some of the stuff that when I started digging, I'm like, oh, wow. This might be what's going on. And for me, this correcting these problems allowed me to lose over 30 pounds without like heroic efforts and keep it off. So inside our powerhouse, we went through a bunch of metabolic changes and genetic changes at the last ice age. So when we went from looking like an ape to a human, right? So something like that. And there were some genetic changes that allowed us to transition from basically not being able to store fat to store fat. And there were two major enzymes. One's called uricase and the other one's called fructokinase. And it essentially allowed animals us as sort of ape-like creatures to eat, number one, bananas that were fermenting and things like that, fruit that were fermenting, because at that point we were not omnivores. And it also allowed us to put on body fat for the first time. And that was the fructokinase enzyme. Now, the uricase enzyme, what it did was basically turn on a mechanism inside our powerhouses in the mitochondria to turn down the powerhouse. To basically take something like, let's say your powerhouse is a Tesla, and now it's a 1984 Yugo. So you can, in a very controlled measure, turn down the powerhouse so you can conserve energy and encourage particularly the liver to make fat, right? And great for an ice age, not great for a Wednesday night in suburban America. So uric acid, when it's inside the cell, is the switch in which the mitochondria are getting turned down. So if we could perfectly go into the cell and see what uric acid levels were doing, we would be able to tell you for sure, hey, you're storing fat or not. So in all animals that have a cell, this uric acid is the mitochondrial control. And how they found this was they were looking at bears and squirrels that hibernate. So the way to see this, if you're looking at it and going, gosh, this sounds like a lot of chemistry Greek, animals that hibernate turn on uric acid inside the cell that makes the powerhouse come down to half speed. Therefore, they store fat and then they go to sleep for several months and they live off their fat. So I started looking at that. And actually, that was Rick Johnson's work out of University of Colorado and several researchers, lots of researchers now. It's very, very clear. This is the fat switch period. So I start digging and I look at it and I go, okay, well, that's interesting. So from Rick Johnson's work, we know that if uric acid on a blood test is over a 4.2, the fat switch is on. Okay. Most people think of uric acid on a test for gout. And that's like 6 and above is usually where we'll see that. And we know that uric acid causes metabolic syndrome, diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease. Not correlates, doesn't sit alongside it, causes it because it turns on all these metabolic things. So gosh, you go look at the research and what happens to a woman when she goes through menopause?
Increase in uric acid.
Statistically always significant,
And
just because of it.
Just a quick question on the blood test. Will it be flagged high at 4.2? No. So the doctor is not even addressing it. You're normal, nothing to worry about. And you could be eating a low sugar, low carb diet, but still have the high metabolic disease factors that are coming up as well.
Exactly. So, and it depends a little bit on how you're wired genetically. So some people have a hair trigger uric acid, other people don't. And here's the thing is uric acid's not a standard lab value. So if you go to a standard Western conventional doctor, they're not going to run it unless you come in and say, I've got gout pain in my big toe.
Oh,
it's not standard.
Amazing. Okay. So we've got high levels of uric acid in our cells. The fat starts to accumulate, then take us down the cascade of what's happening.
Right. So a lot of this is happening in your liver, right? So your liver is not only a filter and a cleaner, but it is a metabolic engine. So as uric acid climbs and we store more body fat, one of the things that, so you got to remember all of these are conservation mechanisms. So they're all the way the body says, God, save me if I'm starving. So the body's going to slow down. We're going to store more fat. One of the ways the body also can protect us is we can help the body make more uric acid and store more fat. And it does that through either the consumption of fructose, and especially high fructose corn syrup, but any kind of fructose, right? So high fructose corn syrup is beer without the buzz. Basically, it metabolizes like alcohol. It trashes your liver, preferentially gets stored as a triglyceride and stored as fat, but you don't get the buzz of being intoxicated. Okay. So if I am somebody that has the fat switch turned on and I just happen to eat a lot of high sugar fruits, right? Now, the fiber in the fruits help it out, but let's say I'm into juicing, and I juice, an apple, a beet, and maybe throw a banana in there and some other stuff. Like I put a bunch of fruit in there. I might be getting enough to drive that uric acid up constantly, right?
Right.
So the other way, so we have to look at the kind of the fructose intake in the diet. That's pretty basic. And then anything else, alcohol, sugar in any way, shape, or form is all going to raise it. But our body has another way that it can actually make fructose. And it does it in the bloodstream. It's called the polyol pathway. So it's this secondary pathway in which the body can take glucose and other forms of nutrients and turn it into fructose. And one of the things that the researchers found was when you are dehydrated, right? So let's say I'm going into a meal, I'm a little bit dehydrated because I didn't drink enough water today. And I'm going to sit down and I'm going to have a healthy meal of healthy starchy carbohydrates. Maybe they're sweet potatoes and other stuff, which is mostly glucose, right? A little bit of fructose, but mostly glucose from a starch standpoint. And I'm dehydrated. My body in the bloodstream can convert that glucose to fructose and make fructose out of it and preferentially store it as fat. So if somebody is eating a bunch of things that already turn up uric acid, so all those foods are already mentioned, and they're chronically dehydrated, we have that turned on. Well, that polyol pathway is turned on in a woman. It's automatically turned on. It's higher as we go through menopause because of the changes in our mitochondrial function and the fluctuating levels of estrogen, particularly as estrogen starts to decline. Again, thus we see the uric acid levels climb. So you basically could be doing all the right things and be getting things in the diet that are just stimulating these mitochondrial pathways that are driving your body to store fat rather than burn it.
And then as you store more body fat, there's more fat cells to store estrogen and the xenoestrogens. And then it's this vicious cycle where we just don't know how to get a hold of it, right? And it's out of our control. Okay. And I love that you mentioned juicing because I always say, God gave celery fiber so that we didn't eat more than a couple sticks of it, right? And even just juicing in general, our ancestors didn't do that. They didn't take the fiber out of our fruits and vegetables to get all of this nutrition. That's not the way it's meant to be. So, okay, so we've got the fructose. It's increasing the body fat, but it's also increasing the fatty liver. Can you take that? Where is that fatty liver and what damage is it doing on the body?
So fatty liver, at its very minimum, at that point, if you're showing fatty liver, so enzymes are elevated on your blood work, which, hate to break it to you, you could lose 80% of your liver function and your enzymes on your blood work could be completely normal. Right. So you could have a extraordinarily fatty liver that is very dysfunctional and your labs still look good. Right. Every once in a while, you'll find somebody that's an outlier that anything they do will show up there, but you can lose a lot of function. So when the liver is fatty, you're going to have all metabolic processes are going to be broken at that point. So not only will you not be able to detox because your ability to get bile, which is the exit route for all those toxins to get out of the liver, are going to be impaired, but the nutrients that are there to help you process all those toxins are also going to be impaired. So at a minimum, you're going to get more fat storage. Your body's going to get turned on to make more triglycerides and store it. The other thing that we see is we can see dysregulation of other hormones that have nothing to do with your sex hormones that are part of it. Like you alluded to, we make more fat, then we're storing more estrogens and xenoestrogens. But the more fat cells I make, the higher my leptin levels go from my fat cells, and they keep telling the brain we have to store fat. So if I have higher leptin, I'm going to be storing fat and be hungrier, and my metabolic rate is going to slow down at the same thing, because that's what leptin does. Because again, this is a starvation hormone. It says, dear Lord, make us survive a starvation. So, and again, women are going to have a much greater hair trigger for leptin level change. So we have all that trouble, and then you've got a liver that's doing that. And then the liver can also take non-glucose related nutrients, so things like amino acids and fats, and go through de novo lipogenesis, which is a real fancy name for saying, I'm making fat. I'm making fat out of your sugar and your triglycerides and your other fats. Or it will also go through gluconeogenesis, which is where your body makes glucose out of non-carbohydrate related resources like amino acids. So this is a thing that I wanted to study, and I can't find any good research on it. But, I hung around the bodybuilding world for a very long time, and had, that bodybuilding diet, which was very controlled, high protein, a lot of weightlifting, which my body really loved, but a very tight regimen of food, right, through my 30s. And it was how I was able to maintain a lean body mass. But it's also very destructive. I did stupid stuff. All of us, people, I'm no different than you are. I took fat burner, at the time I took fat burners. I was like, of course it's great. I loved it when I was 30. I felt wonderful. Right? And I think it did a number, obviously, on my thyroid, because my thyroid nosedived after that. But here's what I think is true. And I can't say the research shows this, but I think particularly when people have done a lot of high protein, low carb dieting, maybe they've been in this environment where they've done like contest preps and things like that, where they have really heavily manipulated these macros, that their liver gets primed to do gluconeogenesis, and that they're more primed to do it. So when their body runs low on carbohydrate content in the bloodstream, instead of going to the body fat and pulling it out, the liver just goes, no problem, I'll just make more. And it just makes some more glucose, throws it into the bloodstream, and we go. I don't know that for sure, but the world is littered with people, particularly that came from the fitness professional world, that when they stop competing, they struggle with hormone problems, weight gain, and it's not that they don't know what to eat. Because if anything, there's probably very few people on the planet that know how to manipulate their composition as well as somebody that's been a figure athlete.
Absolutely. But their body also is not 20 or 30 years old anymore. And I love that we're talking about the importance of liver. I talk about the importance of liver flushes. I'm actually doing one today after this podcast. But I recommend it a couple times a year, because we are being bombarded by the toxins in our food, in our environment, the radiation, the heavy metals, all of that stuff is just backing up the liver and causing even more cogs in the wheel as far as detoxing and metabolism. And you talk about genetics and the MTHFR gene. I would love for you to discuss where that comes into this, because that's something where maybe you could get away with stuff earlier on in your life, and now because of that propensity or that genetic makeup, that you are not able to burn the fat, lose the weight, and balance the hormones like you want in your 40s and 50s.
Yeah. So, when we did the Human Genome Project about 25 years ago now, it's closer to probably 25 years ago, part of it is we were hoping that we would find these like perfect on-off switches for everything, the brown-eyed switch, the, brown-haired switch. And what we found was we don't have just one switch for every single kind of nuanced thing about our body. We have these combination of genes that encode for different things. And 95% of our genes are identical between humans, right? And actually like 93% of them are also identical to frogs, just to break it to everybody. So, but those things that are different, that 5% in particular, are what we used to call junk genes because we didn't know what they did, right? Welcome to scientists and how they just like to, instead of just saying we don't know, they make up some sort of derogatory term. But those junk genes, of which one was MTHFR, those genes encode for how we manage things in our environment, how we metabolize nutrients, and enzymatic activity in the body and proteins that we make. So what that means is these small amounts of genes exert an extraordinary amount of influence on how our body operates. Not so much in a single gene and a single diagnosis of a disease, but more how we handle our epigenetics, the things that are happening to us and the things that our body is coming in contact with. And that, 200 years ago, 250 years ago, before the Industrial Revolution, they weren't really challenged, right? So if we take the MTHFR gene, 49% of Caucasians have a mutation there. If you're of Hispanic or Spanish descent, you're looking at like 48%. And if you're of African descent, right at 48%. So we're talking a huge penetration in the population that have mutations in the capacity for that particular gene to metabolize folate. If it was such a problem, it would have bred its way out of the gene pool centuries ago, right? And it wasn't a problem until our environment became toxic. So Industrial Revolution, up until that point, everything was organic on the planet. And now we have, I don't know, it's probably 115,000 chemicals between food and other things that we've added to our environment. I think the last time I officially read it, it was probably 87,000, but I'm being generous now at 115,000. And all of those got to pass through the liver, and all of those have to be metabolized by every single cell. And that MTHFR gene and our detox genes, MTHFR is kind of, think of it as sort of the gateway, right? So it's the gateway to all these cellular detox pathways. So the people that have mutations in that gene aren't as capable of sort of getting everything ready for detoxification. So if we just take that one as a whole, right? Now, as women, MTHFR plays a role, but it has several other genes. One's called COMT, comethyltransferase, that encodes for how we package up estrogen. And then we have a lot of cytochrome enzymes that are the first pass enzymes in the liver that are responsible for metabolizing estrogens as well. But they also metabolize a bunch of other chemicals and things like medications. And, some of us are going to be wired where my detox pathways are rip roaring fast, right? I can do anything. I call it the Keith Richards genes. I don't know what his genes look like, but I got to assume that Keith Richards has some pretty damn good genetics to do what he's done to his body as long as he has and still survived, right? So some of us may have really good packaging capacity to get those estrogen and xenoestrogens out. Other of us do not. So for instance, the CYP1B1 gene, which is how estrogen, think of it gets its first wrapper in the liver. So we have to wrap it in multiple colored wrappers before we can throw it out. If you're mutated on that gene, it's severely impaired, right? So I can't get my first, let's say it's a red wrapper. I can't wrap that red wrapper on as well as I could. So some of my estrogens get caught in that pathway. And then it passes it to the COMT gene that wraps a pink wrapper on it. Every time something gets slowed there, it can't get passed to the next step. I can't skip the red wrapper and go to pink. I must do it in order. So the thing is if I'm stuck, so I'm going to give my example because I've shared my genes all over social media and on my podcast. I am doubly mutated on CYP1B1. So I'm very slow at that. And of the 3 major COMT genes, I'm also doubly mutated on every single one. So I'm slow at both steps. So what that means is 20s and 30s, I was probably okay because I wasn't wildly estrogen dominant. Hit my 40s, I'm making too much relative to everything else. And I also can't get rid of it. And so things get stuck, clog up the liver, and we can't get rid of it. But then all the junk that's in our environment's even worse, right? So now I'm stuck. But and then if you look at the literature and you start digging, CYP1B1 is associated with estrogen sensitive cancers and ovarian cancers, breast cancer. It's associated with obesity and diabetes and metabolic syndrome, particularly postmenopausal. And what made me think about that, I was like, wait a minute. So postmenopausal, my estrogen has now declined, right? I'm not making any of my ovaries anymore. Protective estrogen is gone.
Right.
But my risk for all these things now skyrocket as a woman. Then it's not circulating estrogen, particularly estradiol, that's the problem. It's the toxic burden and it's the crap our fat cells making and our inability to get it out and the loss of the protective circulating estrogen that's a problem.
Right. And that's where it's really confusing to people because it's like, well, all of these cancers are related to estrogen, but we're losing estrogen as we get older, but it's the type of estrogen that we're talking about. We're losing the protective estrogen, estradiol, but we're gaining the toxic estrogens from the environment and our diet and all of that, correct?
Correct. It's this weird, so one of the ways that after the Women's Health Study, that we allowed women to go through menopause and take care of themselves, right? Because we weren't going to give them bioidentical hormone or any hormones, even though that had been standard of care for over 45 years. The next thing was antidepressant because it's a psychological issue. Your hormones are declining. The other thing they would do is put women on birth control in their 40s and 50s and keep them on it until they went into menopause. And that was kind of a guesstimate because, of course, birth control makes your body think it's pregnant. So you can't really tell what's happening behind it. But at that moment, all of a sudden, all hormones are bad for you. But that synthetic hormone we put you on for decades isn't. It defies logic. It is just, you could ask a 5-year-old if you could explain it really simply. Like if I gave you all of this and it was really safe until you turn 10, and then when you turn 10, you can't have any of that anymore because now it's unsafe. Any 5-year-old would say, then why is it not unsafe when I'm 5, when I have a ton of it?
Right. It's incredible. It's incredible. Well, we're getting short on time. I want to ask you about your Hormone Reset Program.
Mm-hmm.
What is involved? Who is it for? And what can women expect from it?
Yeah. So the Hormone Reset Program really came from me doing that deep dive in my Ph.D. program and taking myself first and foremost through it. Like I said, I understood, if you're the woman that's watching this and going, I'm doing so much working out and so much low carb eating that I feel like I'm starving. Like I know what that feels like. And so the program is a 16-week program and it's set to 3 phases. So the first phase is to very much affect those metabolic things that are happening in the powerhouses and the hormone messages to those powerhouses to effectively shift the dynamic, to tell your body you must use fat first, right? The second phase is to figure out your macro. So not everybody does well on a high fat, low carb diet. Not everybody does well on a, high protein, low carb diet. And all of us are a little different. And we often look at the genetics and we look at your hormones so we know what's really happening, but helping you figure out how to be able to put those macros together in a way that allows you to continue to lose weight, but also not have to take an entire food group out of your diet. I am not a fan of all of a sudden, I can't ever have a starchy carbohydrate in my life. I need the fiber. I need to feed my good microbiome. And I don't believe that's how we're designed to live. There's a time and a place for different kind of diets, but a permanent diet, removing those, is not healthy. And so some of it is getting that metabolic flexibility. So that's the important part, because now if you're struggling, you're not metabolically flexible. Your body is burning carbs. That's it. And then the last part is rebalancing those hormones so we can maintain the weight loss and also still live our lives. So it's in that 16 weeks over that 3-part program. And we look at the sex hormones and we look at the other hormones to really see what's happening. Because at the end of the day, it's never just one. Like, you know this because you talk a ton about thyroid. Your thyroid may be off, but there's all these other hormones contributing, right? At the end of the day, you got to address all this stuff. So we look at that, we look at the DNA, and then we also get it all together with this metabolic flexibility to create your long-term plan. And, and the average weight loss is 30 pounds. And so, and it really, my bigger thing is not that we lose the weight, but we keep it off. Yeah. You can do anything.
And it's not just about vanity and weight loss. The weight is just a sign and a symptom of what's really going on and getting your body healthy inside. And I do talk about the HBA axis, how it affects the HPG axis, which affects the HPT axis. So thyroid, adrenals, gonadal hormones, and that applies also to men out there. And I'm seeing it in some of my male clients as well. So this isn't just about females. It's a lot about females. Yes. Just really quick, Betty and I both have suffered from IBS or Crohn's and colitis and all of this. And I think a lot of women out there aren't talking about poop, and they're not talking about their symptoms and how they actually get worse during the perimenopause and menopausal period. Will you touch on that real quick?
Yeah, because that's actually, so the subject of my dissertation is hormone metabolism and some microbial metabolites in looking at women with and without IBS, especially before they go through menopause. Because guess what? Menopause, IBS seems to get better, so hormones play a role in that. So definitely women need to know that we need to be pooping, right? It's not normal to be not going to the bathroom. And it's also not normal to go to the bathroom 15 times in a day, right? So it's all about moving the toxins out, because that is the area in which most of our toxin removal goes through. But on our intestines, we have receptors for things like our neurotransmitters, like serotonin and dopamine. Well, there's an interaction effect. We also have estrogen receptors and progesterone receptors in the gut, and they also interact with those neurotransmitters. So depending on what's happening, we could be turning up things and turning down. And so our hormones can play a role in that. There is that time period right before you start your period where most women, like where the cramps kick in and you might get especially diarrhea on that day. That is actually because the inflammatory cascade, the ingredients that your body makes to sort of trigger the uterine contractions, causes the bowel to contract also. It's a series 2 prostaglandin. And so that's kind of a well-known thing. That's something that sort of happens. Most IBS that's happening is outside of that one event, that one day or two. It's more so that as those estrogen and progesterone levels climb and then progesterone starts to decline, we get this increase in constipation because we lose some of that bowel motility. And then we also have the receptors and things on the gut. And then depending on who's in your gut, it's going to be completely different because they change how you move those hormones.
Which we definitely need to get into next time you're on. Yes. Betty, tell people where they can find you, where they can take your quiz and sign up for your program.
Yeah, so the easiest way to find me is you can look me up at bettymurray.com. That's BETTYMURRAY. And there you can go to the quiz. I have a great hormone quiz that helps you kind of figure out what your major hormonal imbalances are. And you get a report afterward that's personalized to what's happening. And then you can look at what we do. And if you want to get on a call and talk to my team and find out if we can help you, we'd love to do that. And then obviously you can look me up on Menopause Mastery Podcast, wherever podcasts are, wherever you'd like to listen to your podcasts. I have a weekly podcast there.
Amazing. And I highly recommend it. I also love that you incorporate the DNA testing because I've had mine done and it was eye-opening. So many things in there where I'm like, oh my gosh, that's why I had this reaction to this food for so long, or just my tendencies in general. So I love that you incorporate that, because these blanket diets that people are trying to follow doesn't work. And then we can even get into the spike protein and what it's doing to fat metabolism and protein metabolism that trips up our detox pathways in general. But I wanted to touch on, before we go, a couple of the supplements that I love for helping with the estrogen hormonal balance during perimenopause and menopause. And that, of course, number one is the acceleradine iodine. And why? Iodine regulates estrogen production and cleans the blood so the liver can detox the estrogen properly. And then it decreases the estrogen in the receptor cells, which helps reverse estrogen dominance. Also helps with fibroids, PCOS, which I've had, and other issues related to hormonal imbalances. It's also an anti-inflammatory, powerful antioxidant, and it helps neutralize the inflammation and oxidative stress that we've talked about that leads to estrogen dominance. And then it also helps trigger healthy apoptosis, the natural disease of traumatized and unhealthy cells. And there is a statistic that iodine supplementation can actually reduce your risk for breast cancer by 50% and some other cancers as well. And then you add in the accelerated ancient salt, which is not just any salt. It is full of 62 minerals. So our minerals and our electrolytes are really important. Plumps up the volume of the fluid inside and outside the cells, which help clean the liver, support that apoptosis, induce DNA repair, and cleans the body of excess estrogen. Both the acceleradine and accelerated ancient salt are enhanced with scalar frequencies to detox the body from radiation and heavy metals, which we know we need more than ever, and they work in conjunction together. And you add in the accelerated keto. I don't care what diet Betty or I put you on, the accelerated keto helps you intermittent fast, puts you into ketosis in fat burning mode within 30 minutes. So your body's snacking on its own fat stores. But what else is it doing? Increasing your energy physically and mentally, controlling your appetite, reducing the inflammation throughout the body, reducing that insulin resistance, which almost 90% of you are insulin resistant, if you don't know already, cleanses the liver, cleans up the excess estrogen, reduces inflammation, and it helps. It's got multiple cofactor ingredients that increase ATP production way beyond any ketone supplement. And it also is defatting the liver on a daily basis. So we need to be cleansing our liver through a liver flush a couple times a year, but the accelerated keto is doing it on that daily basis, can detox the xenoestrogens that lead to estrogen dominance. And then I know a lot of you are suffering from suboptimal thyroid, especially in the last couple of years. That's going to affect your gut motility, your IBS symptoms, your constipation, and your hormone balance. And that's when the doctor's putting you on an antidepressant because you're fatigued and your brain doesn't feel good and you got brain fog. Well, the accelerated thyroid is helping balance and support your thyroid. I'm getting a lot of my Hashimoto's and hypothyroid clients off their medication, which they are super excited about. They're feeling good. Their periods, if they haven't gotten into menopause yet, their periods are better, less cramps, all of those symptoms are improved. And it really is helping people. As one of my clients says, I'm just so happy all the time. It's been a supplement that's been a game changer. And now the Cogniblast, which is a brain enhancement supplement. Why am I mentioning that right now? Because so many of you are depressed and fatigued and you're suffering. This is improving cognition, focus, mood, ATP, but it's also helping prevent the dementia and the Alzheimer's. So short-term and long-term benefits of the Cogniblast. I absolutely love it. So thank you, everybody, for joining me today. And thank you, Betty. If I can help you with your health issues, you can contact me through the website, sarabantahealth.com, and join the free group coaching. tips and tools to help you on a daily basis, and you will be a part of a like-minded group. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram under Accelerated Health Products, and across over 100 channels on Accelerated Health TV and radio show. Join us every Monday at 2 p.m. Pacific and Tuesdays at 1 p.m. Pacific. You can use coupon WELCOME10 for 10% off site-wide. Thanks again for joining us here on Accelerated Health TV and radio show, and have a great week. Thanks, Betty.
Thank you.